Welcome to the Sonic Collective, a music podcast that explores a different album or musical concept each month, diving deep into its history, context, and impact on the music industry. Join our hosts, Alan, Scott, and Darren Scott, that's way too many Scotts, as they share their thoughts, insights, and personal connections to the music, inviting you, the listener, to discover new perspectives and appreciation for some of the greatest albums and music of all time.
Hello, music enthusiasts. We are the Sonic Collective, and we're talking about our pick for December 2024, inadvertently spawned on by Darren Scott earlier this month, or I guess November, picked Elvis Presley, which it turned out was his first album. And so I was trying to figure out, what was my first album maybe? And I had Village People ones before this, and Kids Records, we're not going to count those. But my parents gave me Joan Jett's Bad Reputation, and it's her first real solo studio album after being in the Runaways, and they called it quits. And it came out, we'll go with the worldwide re-release of January 23rd, 1981. And I think she's definitely one of those people that you look, 4 decades plus past then, and she's still reasonably relevant. She's continued to produce, and she's one of the kind of female OGs. So with that said, let's throw it over to another Scott, first name Scott. Run us through your thoughts and feelings about the album.
Hey, that's me. So obviously I know who Joan Jett is, and I've heard the Bad Reputation track off of this and whatnot, but I never really listened to her very much. I was just kind of cursory aware of, I thought she was like this hardcore punk kind of lady, and I was never a hardcore punk kind of guy, especially in the 80s. We talk about first albums. I had the Columbia Record Club send me out a bunch of stuff, which included Elton John's Greatest Hits Volume 2. So a little bit of a departure from what we're listening to right now. And when I got into it, Bad Reputation was exactly what I thought it would be, because I've heard it a whole bunch of times. But then the transition from that to like Make Believe, it was definitely a lot less rocking, like it took me off guard. I went into this blind, and Make Believe, You Don't Know What You've Got, You Don't Own Me, they all give 60s girl group pop vibes, and it makes sense, obviously, especially for You Don't Own Me, which is from the 60s, right? And it's probably a good chunk of the music that she listened to growing up. Too Bad on Your Birthday is a cover of Ram Jam from like 5 years prior. It's not a bad cover. There's some slightly different lyrics even in it, with a bit of a cleaner sound to it as far as the instruments and her vocals and that. It's really a bit weird, because I thought I was going in for something more punk rockish going in, right? But Do You Want to Touch Me is a cover of Gary Glitter, who is still 100% canceled, and I hope he dies in prison. It's actually one of 2 Glitter covers on the album, the other being Doing All Right with the Boys, which is kind of awkward in context. But she puts her own spin on them, and there is some pop punk and rock vibes to it. To the point that Hewlett Packard even, used the song at one point in one of their commercials, and I guess owed Gary Glitter like $100,000 or something like that. Not aging well as an investment, right? Once they found out. But yeah, I was surprised just that a big chunk of this album actually is covers, right? And that's not necessarily the worst thing, especially with the new artists coming down into like a solo career. You Don't Own Me, Shout, Doing All Right with Boys, Too Bad on Your Birthday, Do You Want to Touch Me, Wooly Bully, Make Believe, all coverers, but with their own spin. Again, they're not just clones of the original ones, and I don't mind it, honestly. I love when artists are willing to showcase the music they love along with their own. This does feel like a lot more than usual. It's over half. I think it's like a 7-5 split on the album or whatnot, but I went back and I focused on the tracks that she has writing credits for. That Bad Reputation, Don't Know What You've Got, Let Me Go, Jezebel, Don't Abuse Me. And, basically she just really hits me as a slightly more aggressive Go-Go's, which, don't get me wrong. That sounds pretty awesome. I like the Go-Go's, and I like rocking female artists. You'll remember I picked Veruca Salt's 8 Arms to Hold You as one of the albums that I would go to my grave with on a desert island. So this really just gives me an 80s poke in the same vibe spot, right? And they're actually contemporaries. I mean, she's been around for like 40 some odd years at this point, so there's a lot of contemporaries in her case. But this is when they're kind of starting out at the same time, that 80s. So, you know, while I haven't had a chance to go through her deeper catalog yet, it's the holiday season here, really busy. I'm intrigued now by Joan Jett. Apparently her and the Blackhearts, they are still putting music out and they're touring. You know, I want to see what her journey was like through the 80s and beyond as she matured personally, her career matured. She had more control of her musical choices and being able to do stuff. I have a feeling, you know, the studio had a bit of influence over those ratios, but just fast forwarding a bit into looking at the albums, and by 1983, the ratio of the music that's hers versus covers flips dramatically, with her still tipping her hat to all the influences in the songs that she loves, which I love. So I'm looking forward to that journey and going from there. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Pretty cool, pretty insightful. I have never listened to a full album of Joan Jett's prior to this month's pick, but I've definitely heard her music my entire life. You know, it's well known that Joan Jett is considered to be like the godmother of punk rock and the queen of rock and roll. She's a feminist icon. You know, these are all hard-earned accolades, and she's had a really long and storied career. So I didn't expect any surprises with this one, but I guess to your point, Scott, just the sheer number of cover songs caught me off guard. But that's fine. You know, diving into the album from first play, sonically, it sounded pretty much like I would have expected it would. You know, a young, brash Joan Jett with her signature gritty, snarling, and imperfect vocals, loud, energetic guitars that drive the rhythm, while drums and bass kind of keep everything in time and move the music forward. It's a fun punk rock album that lacks all the polish and finesse, probably by design, that you would expect from a punk rock album, right? I didn't initially like the album very much, if I'm being completely honest. I kind of found it repetitive, and Joan Jett's imperfect vocal delivery didn't really spark any appreciation from me, though I will admit I'm kind of a snob when it comes to vocals. I like my singers to be in tune. But, you know, as I continued to play the album over the course of the month, I think I came around to it a bit more. Her imperfect vocal delivery sounds like it's actually doubled on some tracks, which suggests that she's actually a better singer than I initially gave her credit for, because you have to precisely duplicate your vocal performance across multiple takes. So that imperfect vocal performance and the rasp she delivers, she has to be able to do that over and over. So I think her vocal delivery is actually more of a stylistic choice than a skill limitation. At least that's what I'm guessing. And her harmonies are always really well delivered too. So yeah, she won me over eventually as a vocalist, and I think I started to appreciate the album for what it is the more I focused on, you know, some of the production techniques they employed. For me, I think the guitars were probably the standout on this album. They just, you know, had great tone, and it was great playing in general, particularly the lead guitars. You know, and all the songs are catchy. They're full of memorable hooks and riffs and guitar licks. Kind of had it stuck in my head, which is always a good thing. Yeah, as was mentioned, I was kind of surprised at how many songs on this album were covers. It's kind of a cover album with an assortment of existing songs reimagined as punk rock. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I love listening to covers that kind of transcend their original genres. And, you know, that's not to say that Joan and her partner in crime on this album, Kenny Laguna, didn't also write their fair share of original songs for the album. The title track, Bad Reputation, for example, is a Joan Jett original. Darren will probably speak more to who Kenny Laguna is, but he's, I think, the only other member of the Blackhearts that is still actively working with Joan Jett, and he's kind of the reason why this album even exists. As far as standout tracks go, I think for me, Jezebel kind of is up there as my favorite. And that also, incidentally, is a Joan Jett original song. It's full of great harmonies. The guitars sound awesome. It's got a sort of driving drum line, and there's this catchy little clap that they buried in the mix. There's also a really weird solo that I think may have been a saxophone, but the way it was played and distorted, kind of, I don't know. It might have been a sax. It might have been something else. Her cover of the Isley Brothers song Shout also gets a big thumbs up from me. It's just a fun reimagining of that one. And You Don't Owe Me, as Scott mentioned before, that's also a standout in my book. It's like a punk rock cover of a doo-wop song from the 60s. Really cool song choice, I think. So I found myself listening to that song over and over again, too. Yeah, so really interesting pick. I guess I wasn't super surprised by how it was going to sound, but yeah, the more I listened to it, the more it grew on me. Let's throw it over to Darren.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, you mentioned Kenny Laguna. Yeah, he produced that album. Well, I mean, one of the cool things about Joan Jett was, I mean, this was after she was in the Runaways. Interesting band as well to go back and learn about them if you're really interested in her history, and especially like female rock and punk. The Runaways story is quite cool. Lita Ford and Sherry Curry, and really cool band. So they break up. She's in this limbo. She tries to get a record contract, cannot, even though she's known to be, a great guitarist. She wrote a lot of the Runaways songs, so obviously has some chops there, but, this is really, she's in a man's world back at this time. Punk is coming onto the scene, which is cool because I think it probably inspires her to just say, fuck it, right? Like, you can't wait for the industry to catch up and let a woman in. She just has to kind of grab it by the balls, per se. So, I mean, she was rejected by 23 major labels. Her finally ends up forming her own Blackheart Records, just her own thing. And I mean, it almost reminds me, if you hear the Dave Grohl story, it's quite popular about the Foo Fighters and when he just kind of formed his own label and things like that. I mean, she did that back then and just realized she had no choice. And then really, low budget, decided to record that album on her own. And again, Kenny Laguna, I guess he had leftover credits. So he was a producer in the 60s and 70s and did a lot of like pop records, really. He did a lot of like big pop records and things like that. So it's funny, I find some of the sound on this album a little like of its time. And it sounds like 70s pop in some ways, but in other ways, it just different and very Joan Jett. But the production wise, and I have a small issue with it. I do find, I think you mentioned how it sounded repetitive or things like that at times. I also shared that, opinion. And I mean, hey, Bad Reputation, that is a fucking banger, classic song. Do You Want to Touch Me? Great song too. A lot of the other ones, some of them are good, some are better than others. There are covers which are cool. And again, we just did Elvis recently, and that came up a lot about back then, where like really there were singers and there was writers, where there was a lot of covers back then. That was a way. She's kind of on the tail end of this. And again, Kenny Laguna, I think, had produced a lot of action things, and that was just what they did back then. Now it's on the tail end of this, and she's trying to make her own independence. They probably maybe need to fill out the album a bit. They're doing this on borrowed money and time. So, I mean, it's a really cool thing that they did, but I think some of that budget constraints and the sound of the time do come into this, where, I think, a little more money in this probably could have even been more amazing than it was. But, cool album. I mean, her do-it-yourself spirit, Joan Jett, amazing. And again, as a female, she, used a lot of themes about, independence, empowerment, and right and resilience, especially for women. And I mean, I think she's an icon in this space for that, as she should be. Definitely one of the earliest ones. I mean, really, I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, but she was the first woman to ever own a platinum album in rock. Very first. That was for I Love Rock and Roll, which was after this, but just shows where she was headed at this time. And this is her first album, right? So, she has this banger song. She's, I think the one thing, and you touched on her singing, and I get it. And I, at first thought, she's a little crude at times, but then I just realized it's just Joan Jett. And I agree. I actually think she can control her voice, but that is her style. She just kind of has this, I wrote it down as like a seething attitude or just kind of like
smoky.
Yeah, she's just smoky. She's got this smoky, but she's seething, and you can just feel like that punkness and that coolness exuding from her in that voice. And even though it's not perfect and maybe not the most trained, but I think she knew her style, knew what she wanted to do, and she fucking did it. And I thought that was really cool. Obviously a pioneer for women. She just did so much for that time, and for a woman to do it, especially herself. I'm repeating myself a bit, but yeah, she was just amazing. Some of the songs are a little weaker than others, but I just found in the end it just kind of peeled together. I think too, it's always good, and we've said this before on this podcast, but obviously we don't necessarily have all the albums. I actually do own this one, but the difference was too, you go to Spotify and you get this, all of a sudden there's 25 songs on it, and it's like this expanded edition. Great as a collector, but I think it's really important, especially if you're music fans like us, or if you're listening to this. So just to go back and experience the album as it was meant to be. I guess there was an early release where it was, I can't remember, it's Hanky Panky or Wooly Bully, one of the covers on there. The first release was actually, I believe it was Hanky Panky, or it was Wooly Bully, and then it was replaced by Hanky Panky. And apparently if you get the import version and it has that, it's worth way more. I think Joan Jett is an icon of what she is. Now, I think when we come back to scores, I maybe have some other things. But Scott, we've talked a lot about it. You picked this, so, it was great to hear about why you picked it and all that cool. And I'm glad that I inspired you by my youth. But, what did you think revisiting this?
So despite having listened to this a million times, I didn't really remember it, actually. There are two high playlist repeat songs for me. Bad Reputation and Do You Want to Touch are actually on a lot of my running or rock playlists. I don't know. Those two really get me. Anyhow, so I kind of had forgotten the album and tried to put it in the context of her first album, and the time comes in nice. We're just around 30 minutes, gentlemen. But the kickoff Bad Reputation to me is an absolute ass kicker of a rock song. What an intro. There's no doubt when you hear that, wow, this woman can rock. But then as I got into the second and third songs, I'm there's two things that stood out, and you guys have sort of said them, but it was a lot of 50s, 60s bebop. I realized these are bebop songs that the Ramones did. So I started to hear kind of Ramones-ish, because a lot of their stuff is da-da-da-da-da-da. It's just a build on that kind of 50s, 60s bebop. And obviously a lot of these are covered, but I'm I think she doesn't sound a whole lot different than the Ramones, kind of 50s again, bebop. So I was throwing for the whole album, as I think a lot of you guys were, because I was expecting more rock. And then I'm there's rock here, but there's always also this, beach blanket, 50s, Ramones kind of stuff. So there's points where you see an absolute rocker, but then other points where it's a bit of a left turn. I really don't love it all, but I think it is a pretty interesting potential first album for a few reasons on it. She did 4 tracks, as you noted, and I think all those tracks, are pretty darn decent. I think some of the covers she does do a pretty good version of, although that's doing all right with the boys. I think it's about 2 minutes too long, and it's 3 minutes long. I literally 2 listens to that album was about a minute into that song, and I'm just this is a shocker. As an album now, I can't see myself listening to it again as a whole unit, because I mean there's just Wooly Bully at the end. Like I like Wooly Bully and stuff, but it's too much of a mismatch. And then I thought, well, how did it end up this way? And Darren kind of touched on her being very young, leaving the Runaways, and I think this is a classic case of a young person with no money or say or power trying to make it in the record business. And disco's just ended in '79, right? And you've kind of got some new pop coming out. And I bet you she didn't pick all those songs. I guarantee you some record executives or producers picked a lot of those songs, not knowing, like, what is this woman going to be? She should be the rocker because she's come from the Runaways, but maybe we'll throw some, 50s covers or other things. Like, they didn't know where she was going to land. So I think it's this bit of a mismatch. There wasn't enough for an album. There's half an album here. There's 5 songs. And also, let's see where we can make this, make this babe or whatever they would have called her, treated her at that time with no power stick. I think they're throwing it all against the wall, kind of to get an album together and see where she lands as an artist. So in that sense, I'm like, it's not a big surprise that the album is this way. So love it as an album now? No. Loved it as a kid? Yeah. Couple songs I really dig on this, like those 2 that I mentioned. And context of how it probably came together, it kind of makes sense. But it is a real mishmash. Again, bebop 50s to kick-ass rock, and doesn't sit cohesively for me. So
that's an interesting bit of insight, Scott, because
don't know if it's true.
I don't know if Darren mentioned this, but when they were trying to get this record out, I think they reached out to like 23 different labels, and they got rejected over and over and over again, which is why they self-released. So yeah, maybe the throwing spaghetti at the wall thing, because they didn't know how it was going to land. That's
maybe I don't know.
Good insight. Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk scoring and final thoughts. Over to you, Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, so this one, again, like you said, it's a bit of a mishmash. There's a lot of her influences on here. I don't want to ding her too hard for that. As Alan said, there's some interesting self-produced tracks on there. Jezebel was a real favorite of mine as well, too. If you put Bad Reputation aside, which is obviously, the numbers don't lie. That's just the most popular song from this album ever. So I'll give it like a 3.5 as far as like just enjoying it. I had to take a little bit off just because I really want to see more of her material on here. And it's not, when we talk about albums, it just feels a little curated as far as some of the experiences. And I get that she's taken them and moved them, kind of transitioned them over into a new genre in a lot of times. But some of it is just really the 50s and 60s sounds continuing to come through. So I don't think it's a bad set of songs, but as an album, I think that's about as high as I can rate it. But that being said, like I said, this just completely sparked. We get back into influence and what does that exactly mean? You can be like, did it influence me in the day, or having listened to it, has it really sparked me now? And so for this review, I'm going to go with the interpretation of, has it sparked me now? And it very much has. I'm, as I said before, completely intrigued by Joan Jett right now. I want to zoom ahead 2 albums to where she's pretty much completely in the driver's seat and writing and producing and getting those tracks out with a couple covers still in to pay homage to her influences. So 4.5 on influence, just because then it makes the math easy, and I'll give it a 4 overall. What about you, Alan?
Yeah, dude. We're pretty close. For influence, I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. Not necessarily because it influenced me personally to want to listen to Joan Jett 2 albums later, but more to do with the fact that she herself was an influential figure over the years, and you can't argue that she didn't leave a lasting legacy on rock music and punk music, and in particular, female-fronted music. She blazed a lot of trails. So for that reason, I think influence is getting a 4 out of 5 for me. As far as recommendation goes, I'm also going to give it a 4 out of 5. I think anybody who likes female-fronted rock music owes it to themselves to give this album a listen, because it is kind of an important album. in the grand scheme of things. Overall, I landed at a 3.5 out of 5, and I actually bumped it up from my original score. Music is subjective, and this is not the kind of album that I'm personally drawn to. Certainly not as a full album, maybe the odd song here or there, but I can also see how if you grew up on this stuff, it might be a different story. So, I have no particular knocks against it. It's just not necessarily my cup of tea. It is a product of its time, and it broke new ground. Definitely worth a listen. So overall, 3.5 out of 5 is where I land.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to you guys. I mean, obviously, I like to throw in a few more facts before I go in scores, so I have a few little ones. One, she is in the Guinness Book of Records for the world's longest set. She played 44 songs in 1982 at a concert, and that is the world record for most amount of songs played in one set. Wow. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. And you hear it now, and I mean, I just saw Bruce Springsteen in Calgary, which was amazing. He plays for a long time, and by the way, fucking amazing. I'm not even the hugest Bruce Springsteen fan, and it blew my mind. But him, and you hear the Foo Fighters and others. Even Taylor Swift is in that category now. So kudos. But she has the world record. So Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, probably a pretty good reference. Early on, apparently, he gave her a lesson and was a big fan of hers and has been to date, and amazing. And can't say this, but can't say it's enough, but I mean, 2015 inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So her resume is amazing. So well done, Joan Jett. With that, though, I mean, I think we're actually all really close here, and we've actually, it's funny, I like that we all mentioned similar points, but for me, I just thought, the production and some of the stuff, and I get it was self-produced, so I mean, it's going to suffer from those deficiencies, but for me, I'm going to go influence, it was an influence, but the album for me, I think it's a 3.5 there. Recommend, it's heavily more weighted because this is a staple of what you should go back and listen to, but, maybe not the biggest, quantity and quality of songs that you might like. I would recommend, and I said it earlier, but recommend just the original version. Don't necessarily go in and listen to the extra 20 songs. You don't need that. I think it's better just do that. But I'm going to give it a 4 for the recommend. But overall, I'm coming in at 3.5. I mean, I think that's respectful of what it is. But I think the sound and production is a little bit dated. And I mean, Kenny Laguna, awesome. And he has been with her and amazing, but was a product of that time. And it's showing that age a little bit for me. But yeah. Joan Jett, love her. How can you not? And in a ton of movie soundtracks too, and things like that. They use her all the time, especially Bad Reputation. All right, Scott, what were your final scores?
Yeah, I'm really surprised, on my own experience of this album, and also that I think this is most harmonized we've been almost. I think we're all saying similar things, slightly different words. So influence, it's funny, I always think of influence now, what am I going to do with it now? But I've got to use influence. I remember sitting in my parents' car camping with the door open, and they let me listen to the cassette once as to not wear it down the car battery too much. And there is a part of me that thinks hearing Bad Reputation blasted at car speakers at 10 years old must have made me curious about more guitar-based rock. So I'm giving it a 4. Now, my other ratings are very different. So recommend, I'll also give it a 4, even almost a 4.5, but I'll say 4. So, I mean, if you're trying to understand the story of music, one of the first big female rock stars that's still around, right? So give it a 4. But that doesn't mean the album's great to me. I think listening to it, experiencing it, and again, there's 2 songs on here I listen to a lot, so that should almost make it a 5. Just if you're thinking how many albums have 2 singles you listen to, but I'm going to just give it a 2.5. That's kind of where I land because I think all the stuff I said is true. Do I want to listen to this album again? No. Some of the songs are just lame. Some of them go on too long. It's not an album. Wooly Bully. I love that song, man. Fast Times at Ridgemont High. You got me for the listen, but as an album, I don't think it's a great album. I think there's some great songs there. I think it started an amazing career. Absolutely listen to it if you love music to understand, but influence. Yeah. Yep. Recommend. Yeah. Great album. No.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, if you look at something and Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, it's just there's a concrete plan and the instrumentation and all the songs flow together, or if you just think of some of the really, really top 10 albums, right? I mean, I think you'll find that where this is like historically amazing, and Joan Jett has her own genre and cool and start all this thing, and there's a story there, and Bad Reputation is a banger, but really, like it a lot of the other stuff is kind of forgettable in the end. So, we got to be, I guess, true to that. Yeah.
Well, and if you think of it from a punk perspective, right? Like a first album out of a punk group or a punk artist who isn't necessarily welcome in the genre, which is kind of ironic considering punk isn't welcome in the greater music sphere at this point. And then she's like trying to get through two doors, through the punk door and just the broader music door. I don't know many other albums that are as punk as this one, where she's like, I can't even get into the Outsiders Club, so we'll just do it ourselves and get it out there, kind of thing, right? So I have a deep appreciation for this album from that point. But like you said, technically maybe not the best outing, but does it need to be? I don't think so.
Yeah, she would have been good in the Riot Girl genre. She should have been with Bikini Kill and stuff. But I mean, she probably Bikini Kill would probably cite her. Yeah, it would cite her and a lot of those Riot Girl bands that were so amazing in the early '90s, late '80s of that time.
Obviously, time gives us a benefit, but I mean, would she have ever guessed? I mean, she's 23, I think, when she made this. So she was like 16 in the Runaways or something. Would she ever guessed at that time that she'd still be truly a legend and still touring? She could still feel multi-thousand person venue, right?
Oh,
and she was on tour with Motley Crue and Def Leppard the other year and Poison. But I mean, to wonder, like, when you put this out, could you have imagined you become a legend?
No.
And is that the goal, right? So
I suppose so. All right. So I always forget after 10 years still if it's Ellen or Scott after me. I have never remembered that one. I don't know why. It's a block.
Yeah, it's me. So I'm on the fence here, guys. If we want to continue this trend of very first albums, I'm happy to do so. However,
not the Chipmunks. It has to be worth listening to.
Touche. My first album was a compilation album, which does technically violate our rules. But if you guys are okay with that, then I'm happy to select that. Otherwise, I'll go back to the drawing board.
I didn't pick Hit Express. Hit Express was a huge compilation album that was on my list. I was like, no, it's a compilation. But I'm happy if you want. But
Soundwaves and Full Tilt. You know what? It sounds like we might be talking about a separate round where we pick those compilation albums that made our childhood. Alan, I think you should maybe go another
Volume 3 from the gas station.
No, I feel like I shouldn't really.
That you used to
To be fair,
Alan.
My compilation album is all from one band. It was the Best of the Beach Boys Volume 2.
That was the first concert I went to go see was the Beach Boys.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd say that's allowed. I would say that's allowed.
We'll allow it?
Well, I would think so. If that's
I'd say if that changes. I was thinking of mixed like different bands, Duran Duran and Culture Club and
Full Tilt. Soundwaves.
Single malt, but not single barrel. All right. Okay, if you guys are cool with that.
I love that reference as a distiller.
Yes.
Well, I'm not the distiller. Own the distiller.
I knew Darren would get it. Sweet. All right, then yes, my pick is the Beach Boys Best of Album Volume 2.
All right.
Volume 2.
That's awesome.
Volume 2.
I literally have that round. I'm literally going to pull it out behind me right now.
Nice.
What I like is we generally avoid greatest hits, but the fact that it's your first real album and it's real music, to me, negates the first rule of Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club.
Well, be careful, because that might mean you're listening to Elton John's Greatest Hits Volume 2.
Dude, that's one of the biggest selling albums, I think, of all time, isn't it? Top 5 or 10?
It's ridiculously amazing either way. So,
okay. Well, it looks like we rocked out somewhat in our final month of 2024. It's a ton of fun that we do this, gents. Thanks again, over 10 years. And those of you listen know that we finally met in person after 10 years in September in Calgary. And looking forward to Beach Boys Greatest Hits Volume 2 for January, right, Alan?
Yes, sir.
All right. Adios.
Hey, thanks for joining us on the Sonic Collective, where we've explored the music, the history, and the impact of some of the greatest albums of all time. We hope you've enjoyed our discussions and gained new insights and appreciation for the music you and we love. Join us next month for another exciting album, and until then, keep listening to great music.